I can't find a copyright date in the copy I have.
Can you mention about this?
Sure, sure,
Okay.
go ahead.
A couple of you are already caught for this, but there's a petition going on to get a Kansas constitutional amendment in our Kansas Constitution saying that the Constitution does not provide a right to abortion, because a couple months ago the Kansas Supreme Court made a ruling that it does contain a right to abortion, and that puts all our pro-life laws in Kansas in jeopardy. So this is about, excuse me, I ran to get this. It's about the only way we can try to protect our pro-life laws. So I was just wanting to pass this around. It's going around in all the different Bible studies. So if you would sign it, if you haven't already, we would really appreciate it.
I read the Kansas Constitution. It doesn't say anything like, what is wrong with our
And
judges?
of course,
Are they
abortion
nuts?
was illegal at the time it was made. So, but you know, it's like 6-1 liberal judges.
You guys got to vote these people out. These are Looney Tunes, and they're in the smoking section. You know, it's pretty bad. So I guarantee you. Anyway,
The eternal smoking section.
the eternal smoking section is not someplace you want to go. You know, I personally think when we get to heaven, Jesus is going to offer us a glass of the wine that He made for the, the wedding. He's probably going to all hand us Cuban cigars. That'll be pre-revolution. That'll be pre-revolution Cuban cigars.
As long
But
as they're
that's,
not embargoed, it's okay.
that's right. Yeah, yep, exactly. So anyway, the words of the day. Okay, here's a word. We've kind of had this before, but not really. This is a kind of interesting word. It's not translated at all what it means, and you'll find out why. We are expurgated. Oh, this is an N. We are, we're expurgated, right? You know what that means? No. Expurgated means they change the words to protect the innocent or the guilty. They change the words to make them not sound sexual or you know the Victorian era, right? You ever read a Victorian novel? Okay, how many times do they talk about going to the privy? Do they even use the word?
Probably not.
Never. They talk about nudity. They talk about taking people's underwear or taking their clothes off. Ever?
No.
Never. You know why? It's because it's the Victorian era. They just didn't write that way. They didn't talk about those things. So therefore, words like this, ge gymnasmos, which is, by the way, a verb, but this means literally it means to train in the nude, to practice in the nude or naked. To practice naked. Why? Why practice naked? What's the deal?
It's
cooler. Because you're going to compete naked, right? Matter of fact, in history, you know the history, right? There's one person in the whole history of the Greek Olympics who wore any clothing. Right? You know about this, right? No. You don't? Wait, this is basic school stuff. This is stuff they should have taught you. There was one person, one guy, who wore shorts to run the Olympics. And he lost his race. They were his lucky shorts. No kidding. It's in Greek literature. It was his lucky shorts, and they came off halfway through, and he tripped, and he lost the race. And he ended the race with no shorts, like everybody else. So the thing is that the Greeks practiced naked. What were they practicing for? We've been through this. This is like, what's a Greek education? Number one?
Body and mind.
Well, the gymnasium, military, then athletics, and then your mind. Right? Logic, reasoning, and literature of the times. Basically memorizing the Greek poetry and the Greek epic poetry, the Odyssey, Iliad, that kind of thing, and other stuff. They had a lot of poetry. But anyway, the big deal is that this remember, Greek is concrete. So when I tell you that the Greek, when they're training naked, what that means is they are not training for war. What do you do when you train for war? You always wear armor of the kind. Yeah, and basically they had a crevasse, they had some armor. We don't know what kind of level of armor they had, remember, because metal is not ubiquitous in the period. So, but they would carry, if you read my book Centurion, you know that the legions trained by carrying double weight weapons. They had lead-weighted weapons that they carried, so the troops would get used to double weight, like a gladius that was double the weight when they practiced, so that when they actually went to war, then the gladius that they used was half the weight, but it was made of iron. And so they would, you know, be able to swing it and use it more effectively. The shields were the same way. They double weighted the shields. We don't know if the Greeks did that. There's not enough historical evidence. When they trained like the Romans did later, they did, we know. But in the early periods, we had no idea. But when they trained for athletics, they always trained naked. Now the thing is that to us, training for athletics means we're training for athletics. Why did the Greeks train for athletics?
So they'd be better at war?
So they'd be better at war, yes, precisely. So they'd be better human beings in terms of your strength and fitness, right? So just keep this in mind. This is important stuff. This other word, D-O-K, D-O-C-K, whatever, you take your choice, E-I, doke means to think. To think. You look by implication. Look, I love this by implication, because what does that mean? What do you think by implication means whenever you see it, especially in Strong's and Vines? We didn't want to translate it as to think, so by implication it means, so therefore we translate it, look what they did, translate it in the King James. They translate it to be accounted, to please, to be of reputation, to seem, to suppose, to think, and trout. Now why would I take a word that means, look what it says, it's a primary verb, used only in alternative in certain tenses of the same meaning, to think. To think. So when you translate this word, what would you translate it by just its own definition as a word in Greek? What would you translate it as? To think. Yeah. But by implication, to seem. Right? I'm like, dudes, okay, this is why you got to be cautious. There's another one I've got that later on we'll look at it. I'll include it as a word of the day, which basically, we'll see, ecclesia, right? Remember ecclesia? Ecclesia means the Athenian democracy. The only thing this means is the Athenian democracy. That's the only meaning for the word, period. And the word became to be known as the word for the church. And it's translated church. Matter of fact, ecclesia is the same word used by the Greek Orthodox. The Orthodox churches call themselves ecclesias. It literally means called out, right? We'll see it later, and we'll see what the Vines and Strong say about it. But okay. It means the Athenian democracy. It means the called out people. It's a gathering or group of people that are called out for a specific reason. It's cool. Translated church, but church comes from the word Kyrios, which means Lord Mithras, which comes from the fact that the early church met where the Mithrans met and infiltrated the Mithrans. And so therefore they called their place of worship Kyrios, the Lord's place, the Lord's house, basically. You know, and they worshiped in underground places. This also helped create a subterfuge. What's subterfuge? If I say I'm going to the Kyrios, then remember Christianity was outlawed for a period of time there between the 1st and the 2nd and the 3rd century. So if I said I'm going to Kyrios, right?
Oh, good, okay.
Yeah.
You're not going to be singled out, martyred, or whatever.
Exactly. So it's really interesting, you know, but in the Greek, it doesn't mean a church. It means the Athenian democracy. And it's very important because it tells you exactly how the church looked at itself, how Teen Hodos looked at itself and did itself. So anyway, this is the other word. And remember, like we had pistis before. We had pistis every time in the 11th chapter. This is paideos. Paideos means to train. to train. As a matter of fact, but the problem is, what's the problem? Well, we'll see it. The problem is the same that we've had for a while on this. Let's see, we were at 10, so I just want to remind you of 10. We'll go right into 11, because we already parsed 10. But, let's see, 10. I think I'll repeat 1. I should have put 1 in here, because I should go back to 1. Anybody got 1 in the NIV? Anybody look at the NIV? Read 1 for us in the NIV, or any Bible, any version you got.
First one?
Yeah, first one, first.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us.
Okay, that was even the scripture for the day. They had parts of the Pistis chapter, the faith, well, it's Pistis, not faith. Forget faith. There's no word for faith in Greek. We call it the faith chapter, but 11, and then it goes directly into 12. And you notice what it says. It's talking, we translated it, and I want to go back to our translation, and I've got it someplace in here, I think, but I should have gone and grabbed that, because the important thing about our translation is it puts it in a better context, I think. But this is okay, right? Because what is it talking about? It's talking about running a race. And then it immediately transfers from running a race to discipline. That God's going to discipline you, that your fathers discipline you, right? Beat you. God's going to beat you. Wait a second. Now how's it going to help you win a race?
Don't we use the word discipline though to, like, when we talk about self-discipline or becoming disciplined, that something means to, focus on it, work hard toward it, make yourself work out or whatever it may be. It doesn't always mean like getting punishments for doing wrong, does it?
I agree with that. Paideus, okay, the only way you get discipline out of Paideus means in Greek to train or to be trained, to tutor, okay? To train or to tutor. The only way you get discipline out of Paideus is that Paideus comes from the word, I think it's paideia, which means a child, which means, it means a child, a boy specifically, but it can also be a girl. And it comes from the word to strike, meaning to strike with impunity. Okay, you know why, right? Because in a Greek society is very different than ours in the sense that if Brett's running around like a crazy head and he's a child, he's not over 30 years old, and I think I need to stop him from what he's doing. What do I do as an adult Greek male?
Smack him upside the head.
I smack him upside the head. Now, if I kill him, that's probably a bad thing. Somebody's going to be really irritated at me. But literally, you find this in a lot of these ancient societies. But the only way you get to Paideus is from the word meaning to strike with impunity, which is a child. The problem is this is another one of those implied meanings, right? So the meaning of the word, the only way you can translate this word is really as training unless you see a determinant, something that determines that it pushes it in the other direction, right? And usually in Greek that's going to be something very specific. But the point I want to make is this whole chapter is about Paideus, about training. And we see it from the very, now remember, there were no chapters in the beginning, right? These have been set apart as ideas by our translators, interpreters, people who took the text and tried to put it into, it starts with no spaces, no verses, no chapters, no paragraphs, no sentences. So what do I have to add? I have to add. Chapters are cool, but it started with chapters, and then it went to verses, and then it went, statements, which that was even before they invented sentences. Sentences are relatively new in our language, right? You knew that. So all these things that we've added to it to enable us to understand it, and we pray and hope that our translators got it close to right. Now, sometimes we see it's not as close to right as we would like, but that's okay. I mean, that's the way it is. That's why, okay, I hope you're all with me. I like looking at it this way because I want to know exactly what it says the best I can. And the best I can do is we can look at the Greek and see what the Greek says, right? And then try to parse, you know, the strength of the meaning in the logos to telos, right? The logical argument to the unstated telos within the contents of the Greek. And that's what we're trying to do. So in 10, it says, I'll read this to you. 10, our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought blessed, but God disciplines us for our good that we may share in his holiness. And we had translated through the translation, assigning a reason the fact that toward a few days they themselves train up a child as they think right. That is, you know, our fathers. It doesn't use the word fathers, but assigning a reason the fact that in the previous statement, they talked about pater, about fathers. Assigning a reason the fact that toward a few days they themselves train up a child as they think right. But moreover, they bear together, they contribute, that they participate to the himself sanctity. The himself goes back to the previous verse, which was God. Actually, theos was mentioned. It's a reflexive pronoun, which is before the reflexive pronoun refers back to God. So this is totally different. Our translator said, our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good that we may share in his holiness. What it says according to the Greek is that the training our fathers gives us contributes to the overall training that God gives us. In other words, don't disparage the training you got from your father. And by the way, the word, you notice, again, the word discipline keeps being used in the translation. But discipline is not what it means. It means to train. So, well, let's see if that fits even more within the context, right? Here's 11. Here's 11. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained in it. Uh-oh, wait a second. Trained in it? They translated the word from discipline to train again? What? This is kind of like, you know, angelos, right? In the beginning of, do you remember way back in the beginning of Hebrews, they translated angelos every time as angels. But then they started translating it as messengers. What does the word mean? Messengers. So, you know, okay, it's cool. Angelos, when I say angelos, you think angels. But the word doesn't mean angels. It means messengers. Okay, but the implication, right? My goodness, the implication could like doom us all. You know, who's coming to talk to us? I've got some Jehovah's Witnesses came by, and I've got some Baptists come by, and sometimes the Lutherans come by, but I've never had an angel come by my door yet. It may. It may. But the important thing is, to the Hebrews who are probably in Alexandria, what's the most important thing for them? Are they looking for angels to come by? What are they looking for? They're spreading the message because they have something important to say. They have something so important to say that, look, this whole tome, this whole document, Hebrews, is about the message that they have to give to people and how to get that message out. And that's where we are today. We already went through the pistis chapter, the persuaded. They're all persuaded. They're persuaded. They want to know what to do with that persuasion. Right? You're persuaded. Isn't that your question? I mean, you're not questioning, well, okay, we always are questioning if we're persuaded. I think that's a problem of humankind. Because Martin Luther did. Did you know that? So did Calvin. Remember, Calvin developed his theology, which I think is totally crazy, but he developed his theology because he constantly felt like he was not persuaded. He wondered why he did not feel that he was persuaded. So I know that not everyone feels persuaded. I think science persuades you, philosophy persuades you, and the legal historical method that we see in the documents persuades you. But the persuasion we're talking about is they felt persuaded. They knew they were persuaded. They want to know, what do we do about the persuasion? What do we do now? And that's what Hebrews has spent 11 chapters building up to the persuasion part, and now they're telling us what to do about it. And that's why it's the Paideus, the training chapter. So let's see how this parses in the Greek. 11. Now, it's not now, it's but. But, all, pas, all. Not, it's not no, it's not. Chastening. Paideia, tutorage, training. Chastening, it's interesting. For pros toward the ho is there, it's the present. Paraimi, to be near. Now, okay, I want it. Paraimi. Paraimi. All right. Let's do our Greek parsing. Para means near. Imi.
To be.
Yeah, to be. All right. From what we know, how important is this word?
Very.
In our, what they did is, okay, I'll give you that. It is a directly translated, it means to be near. But we know from Greek that anytime I put an emi form out there, I am basically, in the military we call it the foot stomper. Devin says they don't do foot stompers anymore, they put dots. So when they want you to know something, they'll put a dot by it. Maybe an asterisk would be good. In the military, we call it foot stompers. Whenever you see an emi form or any direct relation form, it means the Greek author is stepping out and telling you, no kidding, this is what you need to look at. Seemeth. Seemeth. Guess what the word is? Dokeo. Think. Not seemeth. To think. To be, in AI, exist. That's, again, a form of the ego emi form, the emi form. Joyous, chara, cheerfulness. Okay, chara. What's the basis of chara? I should have given you this as a word of the day. Charis, yeah. Charis becomes our word grace. And this is what I get back to. Okay, if you want to, you can create a whole theology about grace, charis, but guess what happens if you do that? Better stick to it in your translation, right? What did they just do to us? They took a chara word, a charis word, and turned it into joyfulness. If it's really a theological word, what should you say? Grace, right? Or make it a sacred word form in the Greek. But instead, it's joy. Anyway, but Allah, it's not but. There are other things, they like to translate but or Allah, other things, as but it means other things grievous. It's not grievous, it's lupe, sadness, sadness. Nevertheless, it's not nevertheless, it's day, it's but, direct conjunction. Afterwards, husteron, more lately, a little different than afterward. It yieldeth apodidomai. Okay, apodidomai means to give away, but they translate it as yieldeth. The ho, peaceable. All right, we know what the word for peace is, right? Arena. Well, this is a form of arena. It's arenikos. It's the verb. So, arenikos, pacific or peaceful, karpos, fruit, of added righteousness, diakosune. We know diakosune, right? Equity. Unto is added, them, it's not them, it's the, which are exercised. Gugomezo, so to practice naked. Thereby, dios, it's not thereby, it's dia autos. Literally, dia autos means through themselves. Very interesting, they took two words and put them together. They took a phrase in Greek, dia autos, and put it together as thereby, because it's not thereby at all. It's a reflexive pronoun. Anyway, so here's a literal translation. I know this gets hard, but all not tutorage toward the to be there to think, to exist cheerfulness, other things sadness, but more lately to give away the pacific, the peaceful fruit equity, the to practice naked through themselves. All right. Let me Let me try to put this into a translation that fits more in our English hearing. But not all tutorage toward to be near to God or learning. And by the way, what is ecclesia? Ecclesia means to call near, right? So think about that. But not all tutorage toward to be near to God or learning seems to be cheerfulness. I'm not going to use the magic words. I'm going to say what the word means in Greek. So, seems to be cheerfulness, or thinks to be cheerfulness. I use the seem too. Other times it's sadness. But more lately they give away the pacific, the peaceful fruit of equity that they practice naked on their own. But not all tutorage toward the to be near God or learning seems to be cheerfulness. I mean, that kind of fits with what our translator said, right? Not all training, not all tutorage toward the near to be God seems to be cheerfulness. Sometimes it's hard, right? That's okay. Other times it's sadness. Now that's interesting, right? Because if you're exercising, if you're doing athletics, okay, I don't know. I've never been sad when I'm doing athletic training. I've always been tired, right? Right? It's not sadness. It may be not cheerfulness, because I always tell people, if you're not smiling and you're running and exercising, are you happy? Right? So I want people to smile when they're doing exercise, but as it says, not all training and tutorage is cheerfulness. Other times it's sadness. But look what it says. But more lately they give away the peaceful fruit of equity that they practice naked on their own. You get what it's saying? Take the previous advice we had. The previous advice said you have to train, right? And see, I'm not into this thing about, I'm trying to get you away from this thought. We take this chapter and we say God disciplines us. So does God cause bad things in your life? No. That would mean you're fated, right? We're not fated. Who causes the bad things in your life? Well, usually it's us. Now, sometimes things happen we can't control, right? But if you can't control it, can you do anything about it?
No.
No.
Cancer, really stinks, but it happens.
Yeah, it happens.
But it's not God's fault.
It's not your fault usually. I mean, sometimes we like to lay fault at the blame of people, right? You're smoking, you're doing this, you're working with chemicals. But in reality, I mean, there are people that have smoked their whole lives and never get cancer. There are people that work with chemicals all their lives and never get cancer. What is it? It's the world. And if you can't do something about it, can you do something about it?
You can try. We have medical care and we try to improve people's lives.
Well, we try, right? You can always, what I mean by that is, if you get it, you can always work. If you're hungry, you can always work to try to reduce your hunger, right? But the thing is that there's not fault to be laid necessarily. It's just you got to live with it, right? You got to take care of it. You got to do something about it. The point is, the things that I can do something about, right? It's not like God goes, zap, today you're my guinea pig. Zap. You just always have to hit front row, so it's good. Zap. I'm going to zap Brett. And so, he better learn to discipline, right? That's not the way it works. If there's something he can't control, and it happens, all you can do is try, to work through it, whatever. But you got to take, you live with it. You exist with it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question on that, but I don't remember exactly where I read this, but exactly the book. But it was a blind man. I was just cured, but they asked me who was fault is that. And then I think Jesus answered something there.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So, with what we are discussing here, so trying to think like may, something may happen because of maybe God want to do something.
Well, Jesus said that, you know, why was this man blind? Was it his
Born
parents?
blind. Yeah, born blind.
Yeah,
What-
Blind.
Was it his fault or
The
his?
disciples asked
Or his
him,
parents.
yeah, who sinned, this man or his parents?
Yeah, and read what Jesus says.
Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world.
Now, some would say God caused it so that he could cure it, but that's not right. What caused it?
We live in a
This
fallen
corrupted
world.
universe.
Yeah, we live in a corrupted universe. We live in a universe that has probability and chaos math, right? And the chaos math brings it back right, but the chaos or the probability theory means that there's always, look, you could walk out today and your genes get a little shuffled and maybe you get cancer. I mean, it's just because the world is a fallen world. You can't help it. This man happened to have, you know, blinded because of genetic or, you know, disease. We have no idea. But the fact was that Jesus Christ came along and he goes, I can work the work of God in you, because he was God. And then he made it right. You know? The point is that, do you see the message of Christ in this? It's the same message that the Hebrews are given. Jesus did it because he could do it. Right? All of us, the point of Hebrews is, well, we can train. We can make, and you know, to us, an education is nothing. What do you think the education was to the Greeks?
Everything.
It's everything. It's their whole society, their whole culture. The Romans were very similar, right? The Romans didn't fully comprehend what the Greeks were talking about, but they sure wanted to know, right? And they saw in their culture and their society really similar things. And what's really funny is the Romans actually took the stuff, you know, it's kind of like Leonardo da Vinci drawing all this cool stuff. The Romans took the cool stuff that the Greeks invented and used it. Made engineering science out of it, you know? You see the block? You see the block in the Olympics? When you go to the Olympic thing in Greece, you see they have a block? And you say, why didn't the Greeks use this everywhere? Well, they invented it, but they didn't care. It worked once. That's all cool. The Romans saw it and they go, well, we can build cool buildings this way, right? And so they did. They were engineers, you know? They were engineering scientists, where the Greeks were kind of like more like, you know, classical physicists and philosophers, right? It didn't matter, you know, they figured all this cool stuff, but, well, all right, I have to use this imagery because I was talking with another engineer, you know, when I was at work. You know, in physics, you go to physics class or math class and they say, you can't solve this problem. And what do you do when you go to the engineering class?
We can get close enough.
You solve the problem, right? You just bound it so you can solve it. So all this stuff they tell you in physics and in math, it's like, well, you can't solve this. And then you do it in the next class, and you go, okay, dudes, you know, I get where you're coming from. You're Greeks. You care about the philosophy and all the, you know, the logic and reasoning behind it. But guess what? On the engineering side, we want to build the locomotives. We want to build the arches. We want to build the bridges, right? And thinking about it will never get it built. Thinking about it will never get it built. And that's where we stand. Here's another thing. We're going to see this again. Sarx, Suke, and Pneuma. Which word is used most in our, what would you guess is used most in the New Testament? Which word? Huh?
Suke.
Suke. Suke is by far used maybe 10 times more than the other one. Sarx is used quite a lot. Which is the least used?
I guess pneuma.
Pneuma. Well, you know what? How many times did Jesus say pneuma? 2, maybe? 2. The reason this is important, and I probably should have started with this, but you know, sarx is flesh, and suke is literally the breath, so it's the unconscious breath, where pneuma is the conscious breath. This is free will. Now what really gets interesting about this is the word in Hebrew for flesh is Adam. Adam's name meant flesh. It's Adam. The word for suke, or the conscious breath, is nefesh. All men, animals, everything, women too, all had Adam and nefesh. This word in Hebrew is ruach. How'd you get ruach before Christ?
The Holy Spirit descended on you?
Yeah, it had to come on you.
Who did it?
God.
God did it to you, right? The only people that got ruach were those who were given ruach. You notice, in the Greek worldview, this is thought and this is free will. Now, in the Messianic era, how do you get, according to the, we're mixing metaphors, right? But that's what happens when you've got the Hebrew and by the way, we're studying Hebrews. But anyway, you got the Hebrew and then you got the Greek. So you're mixing little metaphors here. But how in the New Testament, in the era of the Messiah, how do you get pneuma?
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and be saved, and all your household, and the Holy Spirit is supposed to come.
That's right. Because remember in the Old Testament, what did it say? In the age of the Messiah,
I will pour out my spirit upon all men.
and your children will prophesy, your daughters and sons will dance and prophesy, right? Very interesting. The Greeks, this is free will. The Hebrews, it's the Spirit of God. Very interesting when we see it used. And let's see if we see it used. Okay, so what I want to note, you notice if you read this in the translation, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who've been trained by it, which is really different than, but not all tutorage toward the to-be-near to God or learning seems to be cheerfulness. At other times it's sadness, but more lately they give away the pacific, the peaceful fruit of equity that they practice naked on their own. Now what I want to point out is, if I read the translation, if I read 10, our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our own good that we may share his holiness. Okay, 11 seems like a repetition of 10 in the translation, the NIV, and in the King James. What does it seem like? Does it seem like it's telling us something new in the Greek translation I just gave you? It doesn't seem like it's repeating, right? This is what I want to get at. Remember, is it inexpensive to write? You could go down and get it at your stationery store, right? And you pay a penny per ring. No. Every word in these documents is critical because it costs so much to put them in. So, do I repeat myself? No.
Carefully.
What's that?
Very carefully, for reasons.
I don't ever want to repeat myself because I don't. If I repeat myself, I just wasted my paper. I wasted everything. And if you read, and by the way, what do you think the Greeks would say if you had a repetitive statement?
You didn't have a strong argument.
Exactly. Why are you telling me the same thing again? So anyway, let's take this. All right. At other times it's sadness, but more lately they give away the peaceful fruit of equity that they practice naked on their own. And the thing I want you to know about this, if you're a Greek, do you ever practice naked on your own? Never, ever, ever. When you are a Greek, you practice in the gymnasium. If you're studying like athletics, and that's what the context here is, you always, and by the way, you know why, right? There's a bunch of reasons. Bunch of reasons. If you're running by yourself, will you ever reach a competitive level? No, because you've got to have competition, number one. Number two, you guys have done it, right? What's the most important thing you have when you're lifting weights? Or a spotter. You'll die if something falls on you, or if you're like doing, let's say you're doing acrobatics, or you're jumping on a thing, and you fall, or you hurt yourself, right? And not only that, the gymnasium also has tutors, trainers, right? And that's what you need. I mean, Tammy will tell you, if you're swimming the wrong way and you keep doing it, you'll never get better. Somebody's got to look at you and go, you're swimming the wrong way. Or if you're running funny, and I see all the time, see people jogging, and you go, dude, you're not running. I don't know what you're doing, but it ain't running. It ain't jogging. I don't know what that is, but it's, somebody should tell you. Somebody should have told you when you were in 10th grade or maybe 5th grade, hey, don't run that way. That's not going to get you anywhere. Anyway, but we know, the point is that you can't train. And by the way, we say it all the time. What do we say? Well, what are we doing right now?
Yeah, training.
I hope we're training, right? This is education. The Greek worldview of education, we would say, with the fathers in Jerusalem, well, go to the synagogue. Well, we go to our church, our ecclesia, right? Our kurios. But that's where we train. So anyway, let's go to 12. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Okay, let's see what this says in Greek. Wherefore, it's dio, through which thing, lift up. Anaortho, straighten up. Straighten up. The hands, chair, hands, which, it's good, hang down, paraimi. Paraimi. It's not the same word. It's not nearby. Paraimi. It's not paraime, it's paraimi. And paraimi means to let by. So nearby. In other words, this is unrelaxed. This is let by. This is relaxed. And kai, the feeble. Paraluo, to loosen beside the knees. Okay? Here's a literal translation. Through which thing you straighten up your hands that are to let by relaxed, and that to loosen beside knees. Okay? Let's see what a little translation would help. Through which thing you straighten up your hands that are relaxed, and your weak knees. Through which thing? What's the which thing?
Training.
The training we had before, right? Not training alone. It said, don't train alone. Don't train naked alone. Don't train athletically alone. Through which thing, that is the not training alone, you straighten up your hands that are relaxed and your weak knees. So this is kind of okay. Why would I tense my hands if I'm training? Probably lots of reasons, but what would be directly coherent to what we've talked about?
I was going to say boxing to hit someone, but
Yeah, I
maybe
was
that's
gonna
because
say
I
good.
do taekwondo.
Boxing could be, yeah, that's a good, there's lots of potential references, right? But I'll take us back to our favorite, harmantia, right? Miss the mark. So when I'm training, right, when we're training athletically, and the Greeks athletically meant throwing javelins, right? Planting swords, using shields, using arrows, slings, right? The reason you weren't in your, right, in the Olympics. Okay, what do? They don't just run, they don't just jump, they also throw javelins and throw discus and, right, frisbees, discus, right? All this. What are those?
Military training.
Yeah, it's military training, it's weapons of war. You're basically learning to use weapons of war. And so, through which thing you straighten up your hands, that are relaxed, and your weak knees. In other words, if you're training competitively with people, and, okay, to the Greeks it's all concrete, so they're probably talking all about sarks, but we obviously take the message that they're also talking about suke. And the reason we know that is because, okay, although it's not within our it's not to us, it would be rude, right? But in the Greek, if we were training, and even in Sparta, what did the Spartans do? The girls and the boys trained together, and they were naked. And we're talking about people under 33 years old. So they are going to the gymnasium in Sparta, and they train in military arms, and then they train athletically together, and then they go to learn the Greek poetry together. So in the Greek worldview, the mind of the Greeks, it's all the same. In other words, when you go to the gymnasium, what do you do? What's the first thing you do when you go to the gymnasium?
Take off clothes?
You take off your clothes. Now you're ready for training. As a matter of fact, okay, what do we say when you go to train here? You say, suit up, right?
Go to the locker room.
Right? Go to the locker room and suit up. Well, they did the same thing, took off their clothes. They didn't have anything to put on at the time, right? I think we probably live in a more delicate society. It's kind of interesting, you know, but it's interesting. What did they do after the gymnasium? What's the first thing where'd they go?
Baths.
The baths, yes. You know, hit the showers. You notice the parallels in this are amazing. But remember, at the gymnasium, military training, athletic training, and they were doing stuff, they were learning stuff. So the thing to take through this is through proper training is strengthening yourself. So again, we're not repeating ourselves. There is a Isaiah 35:3. Let's see, I'll read from the first verse. It's the third verse. The desert wood parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The joy of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. Strengthen the feeble hands. Steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear, your God will come. He will come with vengeance, with divine retribution. He will come to save you. That's interesting. I had to read it in context. In Sirach, which is, and I don't have the full context, I didn't get the full context, but in Sirach, which is an apocryphal book, 25:23, dejected mind, gloomy face, and wounded heart come from an evil wife. Okay, that's not very happy. Drooping hands and weak knees come from the wife who does not make her husband happy. Okay, now obviously in Sirach, maybe there's good reasons to leave out Sirach, but that's okay. I don't think the Greeks would be, well, you're obviously not going to be training with your wife because you can't be married until you're 33, but the Spartans would, you might be training with your future wife, so maybe she keeps hitting you or something, right? That's where the discipline's coming from. She's smacking you. Whack, whack, whack. It's like that, you know, ladies, maybe that's a good training technique. If you were in school with your husband for his whole time, you could basically encourage him. If you don't get A's, I'm going to beat you, right? Yeah, you better do well because I want you to be smart when you're out of here. All right, 13. This is very interesting. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Okay, here's what it says in the Greek. Now, you notice, okay, in our translation, this sounds like it. Does this sound connected to what we had before at all? In the translation it does, right? But it doesn't in our Greek. From what we see in the Greek, make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. What have you been talking about this whole time? Training. Now, I hate to be this way. Well, we do know that if you're lame, a little training might help, right? Could. It depends on why you're lame. But this really seems out of context, because now we have something that is not, it's causal. It's like, you know, something you have an ailment or something, a disability, that you probably can't train out of. So it doesn't seem to fit. Let's see what it says. And kai, poieo, to make straight, orthos, right as rising, pass, trochia, a track. Now this is interesting. You notice we use the word path, and whenever we see the word path, it makes us think of Tinodos. The authors used a different word. And the word path is not correct, because it uses the word a track. And in Greek, it means a wheel rut. What is a wheel rut? Yeah, from the carts. From what carts? Mostly from
Chariots?
chariots, because, and this is really important. Whenever you see this word applies back to the Romans. Romans have their own words, but the Romans built roads, and what was the wheel track on the roads? I think I got it right. 4 foot 8 inches. I think it's 4 foot 8 inches. 4 foot and 8.5 inches. What's the track of a standard railroad in Europe?
Same.
4 foot 8.5. Yeah. What's the standard track of a U.S. railroad?
5 inches.
Yeah, same. Same.
Had to do
What they call small track railroads are smaller, and the Russians have larger track railroads intentionally, so you can't use your rails on their railroads on purpose. They do that. You know, you want to prevent the enemy from using your rails. So, but what did that cause for the Russians?
They could,
They couldn't transport stuff.
yeah.
Afterwards, they couldn't transport stuff in World War II. They had serious issues, so they worked hard to figure out other ways. But the Germans were pretty smart. They basically redid the railroads, and then when they redid the railroads, the Russians couldn't use their own railroads to support themselves. There's deep stuff in here, okay? But isn't this funny? From a single word, a track is a wheel rut. And by the way, where do you see wheel ruts? Anybody been to Pompeii? Yeah? What do you see in Pompeii? In the stones. 4 and 8.5 inch wheel ruts where the chariots and the wheels went by. Anyway, it's not for, it's your homon of you, so it's a genitive, it's the genitive, the possessive form of you. Pois, a foot. Least nina me, in order, it's mina ne, it's hina me, in order that not, that which is lame, it's cholos, halt, be turned out of the way. In trepo, to be turned out of the way. In ek trepo, to deflect or turn away. But let it rather melon, more or rather, be healed. Literally, eomai. So, let's see what this says. Literally it says, and make right as rising tracks, as a wheel rut, the of your feet, in order that not the halt to deflect, but more or rather to cure. Here's the translation. And make rising real rut tracks that of your feet. In other words, what? How do you make rising wheel rut tracks of your feet?
By
Following the
constant
same
use.
path over and over.
By constant use, by staying the course, right? Staying the course. If you like, goes back to Teen Hodos. But the reason they use the term, okay, if I'm Teen Hodos and I'm in the way, what's really easy to do?
Make a turn anytime you want to.
Yeah, turn it. But if you're in a wheel rut, yeah, try to get your chariot out of wheel rut, and you're about like, hey dude, hey, can you help me? You know, I need to get, I want to turn, right? And I need to visit my mother-in-law's house over here, so I need to go that way. And they're like, well, you're in a wheel rut. Well, yeah, help me get out, right? So make a rising wheel rut tracks that of your feet, in order that you are not turned away as halt, but more be cured. In other words, if you are in a track of training, are you going to be turned away as halt?
No, we don't.
In other words, okay, remember the first day of the gym, and I exercise. Oh, my arms, my legs, right? And the next day, oh, it hurts, but it's better, right? And after a week, it's better. In other words, okay, when you're going to use the Greek muscle machines, exercise machines, and they look at you and you go, dude, I don't think you can use this today, right? You're halt. So in other words, if you're constantly in exercise, then when you go to the gymnasium and you take off your clothes, you go out to the training field, and you're ready to practice, train nude, and they go, huh, come on, dude, because you are exercised. On the other hand, if you won't be turned away as halt. They did this. Go read it in your ancient Greek. If a person came and they looked like, dude, you see those kids, the little kids over here, you should be boxing them, right? You look like pretty bad, right? You're the 90-pound weakling. I'm sorry, you'll get hurt. You'll get hurt if you do this. And then it goes on, but more be cured. In other words, by exercising in the proper fashion with the proper level, you'll exercise. Do you have a question? So, you see, what really kind of irritates me slightly is if you read this in the translation, it looks like it's repeating stuff over and over and over again. Mark says, make level paths for your feet, so the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. How different is that from, and make rising wheel rut tracks of your feet, in order that you are not turned away. And we're talking, the whole talking is about training. That's what the whole thing is about, right? From the very beginning, for the first thing it says, so you'll run the race. So you run the race. Are you going to be able to run the race? Are they going to let you run the race if you're halt? They're not going to let you in the door. They're going to say, dude, you look bad. You got this big clumpy thing on your leg because you hurt yourself, right? They're not going to let you in the door. They're not talking about lameness as in a characteristic. They're talking about this continual training thing. So you will be, and when they say cured, they're talking about the context before. Dikesune, right? The equitability, the joyousness, whatever. It all goes back to that. So keep that in mind as we continue to look through it. If you continue to study it, look and remember, put training in where it says discipline and connect the dots. Thank you, Father, for your word. I pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.